everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I am MilkTankerMedia, and I have the privilege of being joined today by a man who needs no introduction. He is the writer, director, composer, editor, lead actor, everything. Probably just sufficient to say the creator of the recent Thomas and Friends fan film, Tobias and the Arcane Merchant. Please welcome Mr. Tines Sensahthe, also known as Adam Guzik. Adam, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's really great to hear from you again, Mr. Milk Tanker Media. And it's really great to be with you here, talking with you again, and talking about all things Arcane Merchant tonight.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Great to talk with you again for the first time in a while as well. Again, first of all, just congratulations on the release of Arcane Merchant, the culmination of 10 years of hard work. It's hard to believe that it's been that long since the original Half-Pariah came out.
Tell
Um,
me about it.
but Arcane Merchant is here. It is blowing up the internet. I guess first question off the bat, just how are you feeling since the release of the movie? As of recording, it's been about a week, I think, since the
4 days.
initial live
4 days.
premiere, and well, since the
Live
initial
premiere,
live
yes.
premiere, and then the Patreon release, and then a few days since obviously the public YouTube release. How has it been these first few days of the movie being out there in the world?
It's been really, really, really cool. I've since I went into editing last year, and as I started really releasing trailers more and more, and especially releasing clips the last few months, starting back in October, I've been trying to be like, I was trying not to hype the movie up too much because I knew that I was always saying, even before I even filmed the first frame back in December of 2010, I was always saying to people online, in person, that Arcane Merchant was less crazy than Half-Pariah in some ways, and then so much more crazy in other regards. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to keep that through line all the way up till the release a few days ago. It's been really, really cool seeing everybody's reactions, especially seeing the people who really understand and get the really convoluted, crazy story I wrote for the second film. That's been
Mm-hmm.
really, really gratifying to see, and really cool to see people connect with the characters as I've written them. It's just been
Sure.
really, really cool.
You mentioned thinking back to the original Half-Pariah, and how you've been thinking about and building up to the release of Arcane Merchant. Um, I think it's fair to say that Half-Pariah was in some ways a sort of a tentpole piece of fan production in the Thomas community, if I may say so. It was obviously hugely successful, had a big influence, I think, on how people thought about uh, Thomas fan content. With the success of Half-Pariah and going into this with high anticipation, did you feel any pressure building up with Arcane Merchant in terms of what people might expect from it, or pressure to deliver or exceed a Half-Pariah in some way?
So I think my mindset going into this second film, especially coming off the heels of Half-Pariah, was my main thought was I wanted to do something interesting. I didn't want to just make some bog standard sequel that you might see for a production like this, either here in the fandom, in Hollywood, just in general.
Hmm.
I wanted to do something interesting. I wanted to make it bigger, bolder. And back when after I had first finished Half-Pariah, I was just in started college. I didn't have anywhere near the level of technology I have right now, or the skills, to be honest. I didn't know how I was going to do it, just that I wanted to go even bigger than Half-Pariah was. And Half-Pariah, even for its technical limitations in terms of visuals and audio, it was still a fairly go hard or go home big scale production, especially for the time in the Thomas fandom. And I knew I wanted to top that. but I still wanted to tell like a really interesting and intimate character driven story.
Hmm.
And I wrote it the way I wrote it, and there was in the back of my mind this the thought of, oh, are people gonna really jive with this? Are people really gonna respond to this? I Are people gonna really respond to the direction I take this story based off of what they've seen with Half-Pariah? That was in the back of my mind, but only very slightly. I definitely just treated the production for the last 10 years as okay, so people liked it for what I so I'm just going to keep doing crazy things. People really seem to respond to that. So now I'm going to even do even crazier things, more of them. And some people just aren't going to get it. Some people aren't going to understand the story the way I've written it, the way I understand it. Some people are just not going to jive with it. There were a lot of people who, when Half-Pariah was released 10 years ago, who didn't appreciate or didn't really like jive with the way I broke Thomas canon or the established like tone that you would normally expect from a normal Thomas fan production. And that's been the case here again too with Arcane Merchant. People still don't necessarily jive with the way I completely rewrite Thomas as an entire like established canon. They don't really jive with this very very sci-fi fantasy alternate universe take I have created. But I thought to myself, okay, but it's also my story. I'm just gonna have fun. I'm just gonna
Right.
have fun doing what I want to do with these characters. I'm not necessarily gonna write them the way they're written in canon. I'm just gonna like write them how I need them to be written, and a lot of them are basically original characters in the skins, or I should say like the frames of these existing characters. But a lot of people have still really like jived with that, and I think they jive with it for Half-Pariah, and that told me Thomas can be more than what a lot of people have done with it. It can be more than what people had done with it before Half-Pariah, and it can be more than what people have continued to do with it since Half-Pariah up till now even. And my thought was is just I'm gonna have fun. I'm just gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna have fun. I'm gonna do it the best I can possibly do it. And some people won't jive with it. Some people won't understand it. Some people won't get it, but others will. And I'm mainly making it for them.
Yeah, I certainly hear that of like, you know, very much I think to say that these films push the boundaries of what counts as a Sodor story or a Thomas story, very much would be an understatement. I think you've gone out and created a version of the world and of the characters that is familiar in some ways, but obviously has radically diverged in others to the point where you've almost established sort of like the Toby-verse, if you will, the standalone sort of timeline of what this Sodor looks like. I guess sort of on that thought process, I guess when you think about creating a piece of fan content like this, do you still continue to think about it as a Thomas story, or has it become something else entirely? Like, is there, I guess, what do you feel like is the importance of continuing to tell this story with Trainz as opposed to rewriting it with humans or in some other method?
So I definitely don't consider this like a normal Thomas story in that sense that it's like, oh, you write it like the way the Reverend Audrey or Christopher Audrey would have written it, or you try to write it the way a lot of other like children's British shows would have been written. It's definitely its own thing, and the reason I guess like I still tell it with these characters who are trains who work on a railway. It's just fun for me because like, and it's also just like it's a medium that I am able to use effectively.
Hmm.
Um, Trains simulator is a tool now. It's less of a train simulator game than a filmmaking tool for me, and it's one that I know really well by this point. So having these characters remain being railway locomotives just makes sense to me because it's a medium I can very effectively utilize to tell that story. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to tell with like mechanical based characters in this way that you might not get from like a human. And also just especially with Arcane Merchant, like the psychological horror aspects would easily and like the actual violence and action scenes would actually make this a very easily R-rated movie. And I don't want to like
Certainly.
definitely don't want to like try and get into that. I have other stories with like more human based characters that they started out as more human based characters and like that suits them. And but for this story, I guess I'm just content with them being like railway engines, railway rolling stock. It just I don't know. I just feel like it works the best for the story.
Yeah, definitely. Um, can you talk a little bit about where your inspiration came for this story? Did you start when you made Half-Pariah knowing what was going to happen in the sequel? Did you finish Half-Pariah and then have inspiration strike about what could come next? What was sort of the thought process that went into it, the development of this story?
Yes, so I do have a really good story for that. So I finished Half-Pariah. I got it uploaded and published on my move-in day to my freshman year of college. And at that point, I knew that I wanted there to be a sequel involving Oliver at some point, because the post-credit scene, obviously, in Half-Pariah shows Oliver watching Toby go off in the distance, and he's like overlooking on a cliff, and he's got this like this grim scowl on his
Oh
face.
yes, it's very dramatic. I think I've stolen the soundtrack from that scene for many of my own productions. But yes, go on.
I think I remember that. But so I knew I wanted to do a sequel, but I wasn't sure what I wanted the story to be until I looked back at Half-Pariah itself, and I found inspiration from what was at one point a throwaway line in Montague's like flashback scene. The line where he goes, "I was sent to work at a harbor where two steam tram engines worked, and you, being Toby, were one of them." So the thought occurred to me, okay, so who's the other steam tram engine? And then light bulb, Oliver. The other steam tram engine was Oliver. And that became the springboard for everything that happened in Arcane Merchant. So that was the start of it. So I thought, okay, so Oliver is Toby's brother. What can I do with this? How can I make it more interesting? Read, how can I make it way more complex and convoluted than it needs to be? And so I thought to myself, okay, well, Toby's whole arc in Half-Pariah was that he became confident in who he is and what he is. And so that is where the idea came to introduce the Tobias personality. So I know this has been like a point of confusion for some people watching the film, and I personally believe I explained it as explicitly as I could in the film, but I will go over it here again. The Tobias personality, the evil Tobias we see in Arcane Merchant, is the original persona that existed when that tram engine body was built. Toby, my character, is a clone of Montague's consciousness,
Hmm.
and that just like and that's something we see Toby fight throughout all of Arcane Merchant. We see it in as early as like the scene where he butts heads with Henry when he's like, "You're holding everyone else up, Henry," and then Henry's like, "What, are you the controller now?" Like he's implying some sort of like comparison to Montague. And then again when like Toby talks to James at Tidmouth Sheds after saving Henrietta from the runaway Seward caused, James is like, "Oh, the Diesels are taking everything from us," and then Toby's like, "They're not taking anything from us," and then James is like, "Maybe not from you," implying that like Toby is in charge of the Diesels in some way, that he's the superior, like Montague. And then people mention Montague when like Thomas goes at the Tidmouth station shed scene. Montague meant to destroy everything we have. Oliver will do the same, and then Toby goes, "Montague is gone."
Yeah.
Like that was like something so that's something Toby fights throughout all the first act. He's like fighting. He's because he fears being seen as like a monster the way Montague was. He fears being seen as Montague, and surprise, he's a clone of Montague.
Hmm. Naturally.
And so it's like something you actually pointed out in your notes for one of the later drafts I sent you. But Toby is definitely Toby becomes a very tragic character in Arcane Merchant. Like his is a very tragic, regressive arc in Arcane Merchant. He starts off being in this place of being high, of being confident in his identity, and that is slowly just ripped away piece by piece until a Tobias personality kills Thomas right in front of him and shatters Toby's will.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a really interesting point there, which is that, obviously the emergence of the Tobias personality is a huge turning point in terms of Toby's identity crisis, for lack of a better word. But I think you did a great job of building up to that with those other hints that you mentioned, the conflicts, the comparisons to Montague, um, and even like the scene with Rosalind, where like clearly something from Toby's past has gone wrong, and he's just really haunted by that encounter, and all these little things that build up the idea that Toby, all these things that shake Toby's confidence in his identity and who he is before Tobias is ever even mentioned or has a line. Um, so it is this kind of like slow burn, which I thought was really excellent. I guess in terms of sort of the Montague twist in particular, uh, as a writer or someone who's developing these characters, how do you, in your mind, go about like defining the persona of uh, like Duck Montague from the first film versus Toby, who is also Montague, versus the Diesel version of Montague that we see in flashbacks? Like we kind of get these three different versions. How would you sort of describe each one in are they different aspects of the same character? Are they totally wiping the slate clean between ones, or how did you think about that when writing them?
So I will say that Diesel Montague and Pannier Montague are the same character. Um, it's just mainly Pannier Montague has become extremely bitter and upset about his lot having been put in a weak Pannier tank engine's body. So they're the same character. Toby is a clone of Montague's consciousness, but it's as if Toby Montague was completely rebuilt and was born in Tobias's tram engine body from the outset. He was like as the Tobias personality says in like the big reveal scene, it was your engine they put in my body after all. But the designers never thought you'd lose your memories. That's why they didn't recognize you, not even Oliver. It was like you'd been reborn.
Hmm.
So like Toby is Montague if he was reborn and lived his life as quote unquote Toby. So that's how they are separate. Diesel Montague and Pannier Montague are the same and are the same like personality, the same entity, the same persona. Toby is Montague, a clone of Montague who went down a different path in life.
Sure. So like the same, you're starting from the same point, but the events thereafter that shaped them into who they became, obviously very different.
Yes. And we do see similarities between like um both Montague paths because we see Toby actually take charge on Sodor. He puts himself in charge of both the steam engines and diesels, much the same way that Montague did. And Tobias even points out, I'd recognize you anywhere, that fear of everyone around you, the way you doubt their kindness. Toby did that in Half-Pariah, and he's still doing it in Arcane Merchant as well, because he's trying to force steam engines and diesels to coexist and get along, because he's afraid if the steam engines reject the diesels, they can turn around and reject him as well. So he's trying to force that like coexistence when it maybe might not have happened naturally.
Yeah. Well, and let's actually, that's a good segue. Let's talk for a moment about sort of that the diesels versus steam engines subplot, if you will, in this film. Obviously, it's kind of a tale as old as time for Thomas stories to have that sort of rivalry between diesels and steam engines. I feel like Arcane Merchant has taken a very different approach to that conflict than maybe many traditional Thomas stories where it's often made clear in the show or in other fan productions that like the steam engines are the good guys. The diesels are here to take over, to scrap them, to do blah blah blah. And here it's much more gray. Can you talk about like how you went into that plot, where you took inspiration from, and what you were hoping to portray with that conflict?
So I guess what I was hoping to portray with that conflict, it's largely portrayed through James. He and a group of engines on Sodor end up not really accepting diesels, and they have good reason. Like the diesels were Montague's army who did try to like crash down the gates of Sodor to come after Toby, and now they see Toby turn around and just let them live on Sodor. So they have a reason to be distrustful. Of course, the actions we see the diesels take on Sodor, they're just normal engines. They're just working about. They don't really have beef with the steam engines. They don't really like actively work against the steam engines, and the only diesel we really see kind of do that is Atherton, but he's mainly working for Oliver to help Oliver achieve his goals. And Oliver's not really like trying to like work against the Sodor or steam engines or Sodor diesels. He's just trying to get his brother back and become strong in the eyes of his brother.
Hmm.
Of course, he's also like trying to like deepen the divide between steam and diesel, between like James's faction and Toby's allies, to really like cause chaos so he can enact his own plan. But it's really more so the steam engines have a good reason to be mistrustful of the diesels, but they're taking it too far, and the diesels are just chill and they're just like caught in the crossfire. And Toby is trying to play like peacemaker, but he's playing it for the wrong reasons.
That's an interesting uh, tidbit there. What do you mean by Toby is playing Peacemaker for the wrong reasons?
Well, as we learn, Toby was trying to force the diesels and steam engines to get along so that he would not be the one sent away, the way, or like left behind or forgotten about the way he was in East Anglia. So he's doing the right thing, but for selfish reason, and that's something like Tobias' personality points out. He
Mm,
says,
that's right.
"You try to make everyone think you wanted to do good, even dear sweet Henrietta, but you lied."
Interesting. So would your perspective be then that that is genuinely Toby had a selfish motivation for that? That wasn't just a dig or a barb that Tobias was trying to use to get under his skin. It was like it was more truthful than maybe Toby would have liked to admit.
Yes, it definitely was. Toby was still doing the right thing, and he was doing it for those altruistic reasons as well, but like that was his like deepest motivation. That was his like core motivation for doing that, which is why he's also like a tragic character, because he's doing these good things but for the wrong reason. And so he wants to not be seen as the bad guy. So that's why when like he and Henrietta are having that discussion in Farquhar's yards, and Henrietta goes, "James isn't the bad guy," and then Toby goes, "Neither am I." And then he repeats that line when Henrietta asks, after he's let Oliver allowed on the island, she asks him, "Toby, what are you doing?" And then Toby goes, Oliver, he's not the bad guy."
Yeah, and it's an interesting kind of double entendre as well at that point, because obviously Toby saying I'm not the bad guy has more meaning as we find out later that oops, there's an evil dormant personality inside of Toby that really kind of is the bad guy, arguably
Yes.
the primary antagonist of the entire story. Um, let's pivot a little bit here actually, and talk a little bit about the production process. Obviously, this is something that has been in the works for a long time, 10 years. Um, in terms of that is a long time to work on anything, let alone a fan film or a project like this. Over those 10 years, how do you find the motivation to continue to work on something like this, to continue coming back to it and pushing through to the next thing, even knowing that the final product is a long way off?
So I think a lot of it was just like I kept envisioning the movie in my head ever since I finished Half-Pariah, ever since I started like dreaming up this story as I was writing the scripts, the different drafts, the outlines, revising it, making all these like teaser like prototype images, posters, banners, making like prototype soundtrack pieces. I think I was always just envisioning it in my head, and I always was thinking to myself, I want to see this vision like come to life in front of me someday. And I kept that in my head, and it was hard to not just completely give up on it. Like a lot of stuff happened between Half-Pariah and the release of Arcane Merchant. I mean, COVID being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, the end of the world is a little bit of a might put a little bit of a damper on the production timelines for sure.
So, but I think like I just like kept it in my head. I want to see this become real. I want to see this become real. I want to see this become real. That kept me going. That kept me working on it, even as like life events happened and I took long, long breaks between actually working on it. But I don't know. It's just I guess I was just really determined to see this through. And I think also something that like I had in my mind was I did it once already with Half-Pariah. I can do it again.
How long would you say, like, what is the breakdown of the sort of steps of the production process for you, especially as one who kind of did like everything, for lack of a better description, like from start to finish. How much of the time would you say you spent on writing in drafts and revising versus doing filming versus editing, and then like the composing the score and the visual effects and things at the end?
So I definitely can actually have a really clear breakdown of that. Writing for the film started very, very soon after like Half-Pariah was uploaded. So I was in my freshman year of college, fall semester, and I started outlining Arcane Merchant. I started putting down all the ideas I had. And then I believe looking at the Google Docs I have in my the docs I have in my Google Drive, I finished the very first draft of Arcane Merchant on December 27th, 2015. So I took about a year to outline and then make up that first draft. And then over the course of, I want to say, the next 5-ish years, I was writing. Just writing, creating new drafts. Very, very slowly, but creating new drafts, sending them out to you, to others, Enterprising Engine 93, just getting as much feedback as I could from as many trusted sources I could get them from, incorporating that. And then I want to say in May of 2020, I completed what was the quote unquote final draft. I actually wrote it in like in an actual like proper script form, like screenplay form. And then in December of 2020, I started filming. I didn't have all the assets I needed in Trainz yet, but I started filming the scenes I could with the routes and the engines and rolling stock I did have. Some bad stuff happened at the beginning of 2021 in March 2021, and I didn't film for about 10 months. But then once I was hired at QVC part time as a part time videographer, I found my motivation to film again, and I started filming again in February of 2022. And I was filming on and off from February of 2022 until March of 2023. In between that, I also filmed for Blue Snowplows Part 5 Railspin Split Space for their Horrors of Hawin Lake series. I filmed about 40% of their finale special. And then I went back to filming Arcane Merchant, and I finished March 31st, 2023. And that's when editing began. So I did editing kind of weirdly. I did a rough assembly edit of the first act. By August 2023, I had the first 29 minutes finalized. There was a bit of a break as I waited for more people to get their revised lines in. Then at the beginning of this year, 2024, I finalized all the rest of Act 1, and then I did the rough assembly edits of Acts 2 and 3. And then from, I want to say, March or April of 2024, I started finalizing the edits for Acts 2 and 3. And then by August of the end of August 2024, it was September 5th, 2024 that I picture locked. So I had finished the actual editing, the sound design and dialogue mixing, the color grading, and the VFX.
Wow.
And so then I actually started writing the score on September 17th, 2024. And I banged that score out in 3 months. I started September 17th, and I finished December 15th.
Wow, so that is like a fraction of time compared to everything else that went into this.
Yeah, so I kept pushing the release date back, pushing the release date back, pushing the release date back. But then like once I got to September, I was like, okay, I've pushed this off long enough. I've made everybody wait long enough. I am finishing this for Christmas Eve this year or bust.
And you made it.
Yes, I did.
On the subject of the score, which, I mean, by the way, phenomenal as usual. If you're listening to this and you haven't heard any of Tines' other soundtracks, he's composed many wonderful scores for other fan projects over the years, including a couple of my things, including Enterprising Engines, and of course now Half-Pariah and the entirety of Arcane Merchant, which was a change from Half-Pariah, yes, because the first film used some soundtracks from existing films or other media.
Exactly. Yes.
What was what was the decision to have the second one be entirely your own?
Well, one, I wouldn't have to worry about copyright bots on YouTube striking my video.
So true.
And also because like I had been a composer for the Thomas Creator Collective while I was in college, and it was what I was originally hired for, but I got more pushed to the sideline, and Nathan T. Meyer, Upside Now Music, was mainly used as like our lead composer. So I really wanted a feature-length project where I was the only composer and I got to compose everything exactly the way I wanted it to.
At what point do you start, even before you've maybe gone in and started actually doing the composition itself, at what point do you start thinking about the score? Do you hear the soundtrack in your head as you're writing? Does it change how you film or how you edit, knowing that you're going to have to score it later?
So, yes, I was thinking of the score as early as like 2018, 2019, even before I'd filmed a single frame. And I was thinking of certain moments as I was filming, but especially during editing. Like, I made sure, as a musician, like, it really helped being a composer. I was able to edit a lot of scenes in ways that left room for the music, that left room for moments for the music to really hit. So yes, so I was definitely thinking of of what character themes to put where, what moments. I really wanted to let the score just like roar, and that yes, I definitely was thinking of the score well before I ever started composing.
Hmm. I mean, certainly there was some, certainly echoes of motifs from the character themes of the first one um, that came up, and some new themes as well, things created for some of the new or more heavily featured characters in this one, like uh, Daisy and like James. Daisy, by the way, what a show stealer of a character! Just absolutely a blast to watch. Um, and that's actually segue into that. Can you talk about? Let's talk about voice actors for a minute. Maybe starting with Susan Adams, who plays Daisy. What was it like working with her and working on that character together?
So, fun fact: Susan Adams is my mom.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, no,
Usually people steal their keep the last name, but you transformed it into your first name. It sounds like.
well, that was her idea to name me. So Adam came from her family last name, Adams, and Guzik is my dad's last name. So I'm Adam Guzik.
Ah, gotcha. Well, I had no idea about that. That is wonderful. Okay, pivoting the question, what's it like having your mom as a voice actor?
It was definitely like very nice because she worked for free because we live in the same house still. So, and that's one thing I do want to point out. I did pay like all of my actors this time around. I paid like almost everybody who worked on this film, just because like it was. I wanted this to be as professional a production as possible. And shout out to my mom for working for free. She, I definitely directed her the most. I mean, I directed the hell out of all of my actors, but especially her. She isn't a trained actor, but she'd been doing funny voices my entire life. So I knew if there was one character she could really nail, it would be Daisy, who was this like over the top, boisterous character, boisterous like crazy wine ant kind of character. And I knew like of any character in the movie, she'd be able to really like do that well.
For sure. I really love sort of a small thing from Daisy, her like battle cry that she has as she charges in and rams into people is just wonderful. Um, when you incorporate, obviously Daisy is one of the uh, more significant like brand new characters for this film, who was not featured at all in Half-Pariah really. Um, in terms of taking characters out of Thomas canon and putting them into the Toby-verse, Tobias into the Toby-verse coming to theaters next summer. Um, do you do you start with Daisy the Thomas character and say, what does this character look like in this universe? Or is it the reverse where you say, I need a character to fill this specific role or have this sort of character type in my film? Which of the existing Sodor engines do I think I can make that work with?
It's definitely the latter. I don't really like. I more so kind of like think, oh, hey, okay, so we're gonna take a character. They're gonna have this role. Who am I gonna like mold to fit that role? And that was definitely the case for Daisy.
Hmm. Gotcha. I guess pivoting back to voice actors, there were a couple of changes, obviously, from the first film. One of which was handing off Henrietta to Caitlin Hill or Butterfly Coffee from a role that you yourself played in the first film. What was that like to sort of hand over the reins of that character to somebody else, and how did you go about? Did you talk about like how you thought about voicing the character, what you wanted out of the voice?
I knew for the sequel I actually wanted actual like female sounding actors for the female roles here. And so I went looking online, and Kayak, as they're known, they were kind of like they were kind of like they were online and they had their own like series, Newton Abbott Railway Saga. And I'd listened to some of it and I thought, Their voice is actually just the right. It struck this right balance of not being too dissimilar from mine, but also like having enough of its own like unique quality to be like to make Henrietta stand out even more as a character. And so I contacted them in 2015 on DeviantArt, being like, "Hey, would you be interested in reading for the role of Henrietta and Arcane Merchant?" And they said yes, and I really liked their reading, so I cast them. And it was a while before I actually had anything for them to record, but they were a really good sport for waiting around, working on their own stuff in the meantime. And I finally came back to them, was like, "Hey, it's time to record," and they were like, "Cool." And I sent them lines. They recorded them. They were really good at taking any notes and I had and re-recording. And I would keep going back to them over the years leading up to the release, being like, "Hey, could you redo it this way or that way?" Or, "Hey, can you? I have some new or revised lines. Can you re-record these?" And they were really really awesome about re-recording everything I asked for, and they ended up, and like listening back to them as I started editing, it became clear to me that like it was such a natural transition. Like, and Enterprising Engine, Matt Machado, he put it best. Like listening to Kayak's performance, it's like you forget Henrietta doesn't have a face because they do so much with the role and they make Henrietta so their own. That Henrietta just comes alive and she becomes like a fully fleshed out character with a really dynamic arc. And I think that's like one of the really cool things. And I'm really, really so happy to have casted Kayak in this role.
Yeah, I mean that's something I hadn't even really thought about. I mean, I guess that's just even more a testament to what you're saying, but for not having facial expressions and things to rely on, uh, the way that Henrietta is still able to convey so much range and so much emotion, uh, just a powerful testament to that performance. In terms of other voice performances, obviously outstanding job from the entire cast, I would say. Um, I guess we could start at the top of the list. You have created what I would say is has become kind of an iconic sound for Toby, not just in your own films, but also you've now played the role of Toby in many other fan productions. How did you go about finding Toby's voice? This maybe is something that harkens all the way back to Half-Pariah, but like deciding what you wanted them to sound, what you wanted Toby to sound like. Do you have touchstones that you come back to like get into the voice? How do you prepare for a performance as Toby?
So I think for Toby specifically, like he is just my natural voice, just with a British accent. Like I had been practicing my British accent for years before Half-Pariah, before I started recording any lines for Half-Pariah. And so a British accent was pretty natural for me. And so Toby is a very personal character to me. So like when I perform for Half-Pariah Toby, like Tobias Universe Toby, he's just my natural voice, but just with a British accent. Obviously, very obviously more heightened, more dramatic, more theatrical a little bit, but still a very naturalistic performance. When I, as opposed to say when I'm performing for Montague, I definitely make his like a lot more aggressive, angry, scowling, growling, and a lot. I definitely like steer more into like not the deeper registers of my voice, but like deeper in my register for Montague. But for Toby, it's just my natural voice, but with a British accent.
I mean, easy enough. I remember. I mean, it was so good in the first one that I remember the first time I think I called you and talked to you in person. I was kind of surprised to hear that you didn't have a British accent and that you were in fact American.
Yes.
Was there ever a point where you considered also doing the voice of the Tobias personality, or did you always know that you wanted that to be separate and distinct?
I definitely did always want like the Tobias personality to be its own separate voice, to be it's a, to be his own like persona, to really drive home that like, hey, these are two completely separate characters. So I definitely did always want that to be like him to always have his own voice. But that's also the reason why Montague and Toby have the same voice now too.
Yeah, little tidbit of canon that emerged from. I mean, because you played Montague as well in the first film. Obviously, did that play into the decision to have that be the twist of him being a Montague clone, or was it sort of a happy accident?
um, I wasn't consciously thinking of it when I made that decision for that twist, but I kind of made like it like a retroactive reason why like they both had the same voice. So it was partially a happy accident, partially by design.
Sure. I'll ask as well about obviously the other big recast for this movie is Oliver playing now a central role, but with a new sound from John Robledo, um, who did a wonderful job. Can you talk about the transition for that role, and did you did you ask John to uh, take inspiration from the portrayal of Oliver in the first film? Was it starting from scratch, something entirely new? What was that process like?
So yeah, so this was definitely a pretty interesting story. So I originally asked the original actor from Half-Pariah for Oliver, James Pyle, if he wanted to return shortly after Half-Pariah released, and he said yes. And then several years passed as I was finishing up the script, and when I asked James Pyle again, he declined to return because he'd left the fandom. He wasn't really didn't really want to be involved in it anymore, and that was fine. So now then it came down to finding a new voice for Oliver. And originally, when I cast John Robledo in the movie, he originally was not playing Oliver. He was originally playing the Tobias personality.
Oh, interesting.
And so John had actually recorded all of his lines for the Tobias personality. Um, and was listening over to them, and I wasn't satisfied with him as the Tobias personality. But I thought to myself, okay, wait, he actually sounds fairly similar to James Pyle as Oliver. Light bulb. Him as Oliver. And so I was like, hey, I know you just recorded all your lines for the Tobias personality, but I want to recast you as Oliver. And he was a little disappointed, but he agreed. And so over the course of the next several years, he recorded as Oliver, and I made sure to give him a lot of direction, and he really responded well to a lot of it. And the rest is history. It would definitely be like I would have him record a batch of lines, and then it'd be a few years before I would get back to him, and then I'd ask him to record stuff again, and then he'd record stuff, and then it'd be radio silence from me, and that because live stuff, and then I'd ask him to record more stuff. But then finally, like the last couple of years, we really like settled down and honed down, and really like got Oliver finished. And if the reaction online is anything to go by, people really responded well to his portrayal of Oliver. Like they really connected with him, with Oliver, this portrayal of Oliver really, really closely. And that's been really gratifying for me. And he's told me it's been really gratifying for him too.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely loved the performance. I think in particular, I was struck by just the range that he was able to give Oliver, who obviously has a big range of kind of emotions, or I guess almost like states of being throughout the movie. Starting as this very cool and conniving and cunning person, and then as soon as the Tobias personality like reemerges, it's this big shift into this suddenly like very submissive, very like needy uh, sort of personality. And for those two sort of to play a voice that can hit both ends of that spectrum while still feeling like it's the same character is really impressive. So certainly my compliments to John. In terms of like the recast of shifting him away from the Tobias personality and into the Oliver role, what was then the process to go out and find a new Tobias?
So I tried a few times like hosting like auditions, and I couldn't really find anybody I really thought jived with the role. And then I was just on the YouTube, and I came across Mr. Berkshire's YouTube channel, Study Soap Bar Productions. And there was one video he had made. Yeah, it's called James in the Sheds, where he like voiced both Thomas and James, and Thomas was this like secret like demon engines, like either sent from the Magic Railroad or corrupted by Lady. And I remember watching it and I hearing him. He played both roles like so perfectly. Like James is like upset, angry, like distress, and the dark, corrupted Thomas like taunting James in this evil way. And I was like, I can see him playing the Tobias personality so well. And so I found a way to reach out to him, and I asked him to read for the part, and he did. And I thought, this isn't quite what I'm looking for, but it's close enough, and I'm pretty sure with a lot of direction, I can get him there. And so I cast him, and I gave him a hell of a lot of direction, and he nailed it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just the pure menace of that character, just any time he's on screen, uh, is an impressive aura to convey. A huge part of that goes into how he sounds. Obviously, another huge part of that, though, is just the cinematography and the facial expressions that you've made. My goodness, is he terrifying to look at as Tobias? Just truly the stuff of nightmares. Um, Speaking of nightmares, I think we would be remiss to not talk about that scene, the one that everybody online is talking about, the standout shock moment from the film. Uh, Obviously, I'm referring to when all the express coaches are calling Henrietta Diddy. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
Obviously, I'm talking about that Thomas scene, the scene of Thomas's death. Has been the reaction, if nothing else, online has been immense. Um, can you talk about what goes into not just the writing, but the like finalization of a scene like that? How do you make the decision to kill off any character in a story, but especially a character who is important and recognizable, not just within the context of one film or one universe, but obviously in the larger meta context, that is Thomas the Tank Engine. How do you go about writing a scene like that and like making the decision that this is going to be a thing that happens?
So, I knew that I wanted the Tobias personality to kill one of the engines to really, one, like cement his status as like the new dictator on Sodor, to really put all the other engines, all the other like conflicting factions in their places. And two, to completely destroy Toby, Psyche, because Toby had been resisting him. Toby had been a thorn in his side, and he wanted to finally put Toby down once and for all. So in one of the original outlines I found, looking back for Arcane Merchant, the Tobias personality was originally going to kill Edward.
Mm.
And I looked at it, and I remember like when I was writing it, I looked at it and I thought, Edward has all of like a few lines, like 4 lines between both movies up to this point. He is basically a non-existent character. He's basically an NPC. This has no dramatic weight to it, no stakes to it, no real lasting impact to it. And so the decision came to, okay, well, Tobias personality, kills Thomas. And looking back and thinking about it, it always had to be Thomas, because Thomas was the engine in Half-Pariah who really first welcomed Toby on the island of Sodor, who really became his first friend. Thomas was that first engine when Toby came after Gordon helped rescue him. To like he puffed up and whistled in support of Toby to help Toby's like fight against Montague. He was Toby's closest friend on Sodor besides Henrietta. And it was also important in that moment in Arcane Merchant, because Thomas had a you'll notice Thomas had like a mini arc in Arcane Merchant. He had like this mini arc of wavering, whiffle waffling support and a crisis of faith in Toby. And like, so in his final moments, he decides he's going to try one last time to have faith in Toby and try and support Toby and stand up to who he thinks Toby has become. And he is punished for it and pays for it with his life. And that's why it had to be Thomas.
Yeah, and it's the ultimate tragedy, really, for to conclude that mini arc, as you said, because like in many other stories, that would have been the moment where Thomas has been not as good a friend as he wanted to be. He makes the decision to reach out, to extend the hand of friendship one more time. And in many other stories, that would have been the moment where Toby turned and everything turned out fine. And instead, obviously that doesn't happen.
No.
That is exactly the opposite of what happens, in fact. When you made the call, was there any part of you that was thinking about sort of the meta aspect of what killing off Thomas means in the context of this is a Thomas the Tank Engine fan film, and this is a more broadly recognizable character? Or was it always purely like, this is in service of the story that we are telling right here?
I think like it was in the back of my mind that I was killing off like the main character of this franchise, but largely I was mainly just thinking about the needs of this story right here, right now. And like this is like this is the first of two climaxes. There's this climax, Thomas's death, and the second climax when Henrietta brings Toby back through the second Warshire reset. But this scene, this is the final scene in the second act. This is the true climax of the entire story. This is like the major turning point of the entire like Tobias trilogy, the entire Tobias story. There's no coming back from this. Like everything on Sodor for all of these characters is irreversibly changed after this moment.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think that is especially conveyed because of perhaps that meta aspect of, the death of Thomas in some ways is the death of Sodor as we know it. Where, up until this point, obviously the canon has diverged, but we can still kind of recognize this as a Sodor that we know. And then when Thomas not only dies, but dies in such a horrific and brutal and wonderfully terrible way, it is, as you said, a huge pivot point. And it's the difference, I think, between something that is shocking versus something that is for shock value. The purpose of that moment in this story is more important than the context outside of the story, if that makes sense. What happens for the audience is in service of what happens for the characters, but it's primarily in like what happens for the characters that matters.
Absolutely.
And certainly it is far from the only like shocking or terrifying moment in the film. Obviously, I think Scrap Gordon is going to haunt my nightmares. That was I think the scary faces, all of the scenes of just like the sort of psychological horror, and Toby being broken apart in the void. But like, I think that scene is going to be the thing that people remember and talk about from this movie for years to come. The shot of like the killing blow essentially of Toby running in like with the final impact, and then just the cut to the black silhouette on red, absolutely chilling. I mean, that might be my favorite shot of the entire film, just for how impactful that moment was.
Yeah, no, that's something I always envisioned when I was like imagining this scene, and so I'm really proud of how like I feel like it's a really intense scene, but I also feel like it's really tastefully done. Like we don't ever really see too much of like the quote unquote gore, and it's not even really gore. It's like mechanical steam engine parts being bashed and thrown about everywhere. But I feel like it's like a really tastefully like horrifying um, death scene. Still super intense, but I personally feel like I did as tastefully as I could.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think sort of harkening back to what you had said, sort of at the beginning of like, if this was done with humans,
Oh boy.
if this was a story with humans, that would have been, oh god,
Yeah.
that would have been horrific, and it still is horrific, but it's in a way that you can almost still palate, because you're like, it's not real, it's not blood, it's just a 3D model of a train. But the fact that you're still able to evoke so much emotion and meaning out of a moment like that is just so impressive. Speaking of whether or not this is the Sodor we know, I did want to ask briefly about how you think about the role of humans in this universe. I think this is probably something that some people have wondered a lot, because it's not like there are no humans in Arcane Merchant, right? We have Randall Cunningham, DC's Fitter being probably the most prominent one, and then Tobias's first kill, obviously, is a member of the railway staff, one of the guards. And yet, humans seem to be, in some ways, less present in this movie than in the first one, where obviously Sir Topham Hatt had a big role, especially early on, in sort of the adaptation of Toby and the Stout Gentleman portion of the film. But we really don't see or hear from Sir Topham Hatt at all in this one. Do you have like thoughts in your mind of like where Sir Topham Hatt is, or what humans are up to during this time?
So I've actually been answering this question a lot online, but I really didn't have any kind of role for Sir Topham Hatt, the Fat Controller, or many other humans in this story. It just didn't really interest me to like try and include any of them besides like the designers and the guard who gets killed by Tobias. So I just didn't really write them in. I don't really know where Sir Topham Hatt is, and I don't really care. So
So more a matter of like the story's not about him.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, I think that makes sense, and I can't help but think about like the scene in Tobias's or in Toby's mind where he's completely shattered and floating in darkness, and then in his window it's just his driver just chilling out, just hanging,
Yeah.
just driving the train, like must be Tuesday.
Oh, that's the limitation of the Trainz model. I do know how to remove them though. I now know how to remove them from the models. I wanted to do that for this movie. I just couldn't figure it out in time. And I was just like, I'm not refilming all of these scenes just to like do that. I'm just gonna keep
No,
it.
fair enough.
People will erase them magically in their minds.
Yeah. We'll pretend they're not there, or we'll just meme about the most dedicated railway staff that there has ever been.
Yes.
I stuck with my train as he was being psychologically tortured or smashed against in the sheds, loyal to the end.
Exactly.
I guess back to sort of the writing process. Obviously, you talked about how the bulk of the time in between Half-Pariah and now was spent on drafts and writing and revising the script. Is there anything you can tell us about like things that changed? Like what were the major differences, would you say, between some of those early drafts and now? Things that changed, things that were cut or added?
I think there's actually like two things really that changed. One, we see in the final cut of Arcane Merchant, during Daisy's introduction scene, we see some express coaches picking on Henrietta before Daisy bashes them and shuts them up. In the earliest drafts of Arcane Merchant, the express coaches picking on Henrietta was a much, much bigger plotline.
Hmm.
There was this whole scene after like the runaway that Toby saved Henrietta from, where he puts her in the carriage shed yards in Elsbridge, where they just go with the express coaches just go to town on Henrietta and they just completely eviscerate her. And they pop up throughout the movie, and then towards the end of the film, they kind of like rat Daisy and Henrietta out to Henry, who's trying to look for them to bring them to James as he's like exiling all the diesels from the island. Daisy takes care of both them and Henry in swift fashion, but they were a much bigger presence in the story. And when I was originally writing them, my thought process was, like James, they are a symbol of the bigotry and intolerance that's running just under the surface on Sodor. They don't accept Henrietta, they berate her, they are cruel to her, and they tear her down, and they are just everything wrong with Sodor. And that was my thought process with them. But as drafts went on, I was like, these express coaches, they're a nice little symbol, but they're taking up too much time, and we already kind of get that with all of what James does throughout the movie. So they were eventually whittled down to that one scene, and that was it. And then the other big change, not as big of a change, but I think it was an important change. When Oliver first reawakens the Tobias personality, in the original script, the Tobias personality immediately goes along with Oliver's plan. He just like, yo, I don't, I want to be strong. Yeah, I want to be stronger. I'll totally go along with your plan. And it was a note that you actually gave me during one of the early drafts. And I went back and I looked and I was like, you know, this doesn't feel right for the Tobias personality's character. He would having just been woken up from 18 years of darkness, being trapped inside his own body, while the clone of Montague's consciousness, Toby, is just using his body for all that time. He would not ever go along with his little brother's plan. He would not suddenly start respecting his little brother. And so, in the draft I wrote in 2020, that I finished in 2020, I should say, I had it so that like, I changed it so that he, like, initially dismisses Oliver's plan and just goes off on his own. But then Toby, still being awake and present in his mind, is what convinces him, oh, wait, maybe I should go help Oliver find the machine so I can get rid of Toby once and for all. And I think, and like you told me, it's a much like stronger, clearer motivation for why the Tobias personality ended up going along with Oliver's plan.
I think I do remember that. Yeah.
So those are the two big changes from like the earliest drafts.
Yeah. I mean, I think I remember that especially the second half of like figuring out the dynamic between Tobias and Oliver, and trying to like get each other to like go along with what the other one wants to do was something that that took a few drafts to really hammer out. I think it turned out brilliantly. I think that maybe my favorite change that I remember was Oliver's sort of trickery at the very end of the film of pretending that he had gone off to find the machine, but then just following Tobias to its final location. Um, which I think was something that, if I recall, was something that was added a little bit later. But I think really played well for like bringing back the cunning sort of Oliver that we had seen in the first portion of the film, and highlighting that aspect. There's obviously there's a lot going on in terms of like different parts of the story being told out of chronological order. A lot of like flashbacks and things, and explanation of like the time at Lernath Harbor, and who these engines, like who Toby and Oliver were before. How do you go about keeping something like that straight in your mind, or like understanding the chronology, understanding sort of who's who at any given moment, and keep from getting your lines crossed, so to speak.
So I think a large part of like keeping everybody straight was that Oliver is the same character, but sometimes we just see him as a tram engine, and so he had that kind of like similar face. He had a like slightly higher pitched, like more youthful voice, but it was still his voice. And for Tobias' personality versus Toby was a lot easier. They share the same body, but the Tobias personality's face packs, 2D face masks were largely quite different than the face mask I use for Toby. Very rarely did I ever use like a Tobias face when Toby was in control. And like the flashbacks themselves, that was the one thing I was very nervous about going into releasing this movie, because at the beginning of the second act, we have Oliver's giant like plot context flashbacks, and then we have the scene in the void where the Tobias personality discovers, oh hey, Toby's still in my mind. And then we go into the emotional context flashbacks between like Tobias and Oliver's earliest days in the harbor.
Mm.
And I was a little worried, and I was a little worried that it would be kind of like flashback overload for like the audience. I was kind of like worried, like, oh, we're getting so much flashback, so many like so much backstory all at once with like only one scene in between. But I think as I just went on, I was just like, I really don't know where else to put any of this. I really don't know where else to like stick any of this, and it feels right just here. So I just let it stand, and people have responded really well. Either they've responded well or they haven't really responded at all to it. So that tells me I did something at least partially right there. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems clear to me, but of course, I have a little bit of bias, kind of coming in having known a little bit about the story and what was what. So that would certainly be something I'd be curious, if I could go in and like watch with a fresh brain, see how much I get on the first go around. From what I could tell, I thought it made sense, and it was clear, and was done in the right order. But maybe something for you, the viewers, in the comments down below to tell us about. Did you understand all of the flashbacks? Or tell Tines on his video, because that makes more sense. Another sort of writing thing, something that carried over a bit, I think, from Half-Pariah and into this one, is the idea of repetition, particularly in certain lines of dialogue. In Half-Pariah, obviously, like the sort of shared line with Toby and Henrietta, no excuses, is sort of something that comes up over and over and over again. And in Arcane Merchant, I think it's a little bit more subtle, but there is a lot of repetition still there. There's a lot of characters that say, there you are. Help me comes up a number of times. Daisy and Henrietta talk about the good things. There's a few of them. And often they're not like, it's not big, complicated things. It can be very normal sounding phrases. Do you set out, when you're writing, with the intention of finding those sort of echoes or those repeated phrases, or is it something that you feel like comes up naturally as you're going?
So I definitely think it's half and half. Sometimes I stumble into those phrases. Sometimes I like stumble into those phrases and they just work out that way. But there are definitely like several key lines of dialogue in Arcane Merchant that I very, very intentionally used repetition for. So obviously the main one for Oliver is, I'm not anybody, not yet.
Mm-hmm.
We see him say that at the very end of the opening prologue before the title card as little tram engine Oliver. We don't know who he is yet. That helps like hint at his motivation. He's like telling us, I don't think I'm anybody. I think I am a nobody in comparison to my brother, but I might still have the ability someday to be somebody. And then we see him say it again at the end of the first act when he completes the first Warshire reset, right before that Toby turns into a skybeam.
Every good movie has to have a skybeam.
Yes. We see Oliver say it again. I'm not anybody, not yet. Because he's still on that character path. And it's also revealing to us, the audience, that, hey, oh, whoa, Oliver is the second tram engine. And it is reinforcing his character motivation here. And then it's repeated a third time. Right after the Tobias personality kills the guard and reveals to Toby that he's a clone of Montague's consciousness. And he starts torturing Toby in the void. And, like, Oliver races into Crosby Yard, and Tobias, like, puts him down. And Atherton's like, yo, what the hell? Your brother's awful. And Oliver goes, no, I still need him. I'm not anybody, not yet. And it takes on a much more melancholy, like, really sad context here, because we see that this line comes from Oliver's deep feeling of incompleteness, of being empty inside without his brother.
Like an inadequacy, almost.
Yes. And so it kind of like becomes recontextualized in the movie itself that, like, oh wait, Oliver's own catchphrase is his own, is him being self-deprecating, is him like putting himself down in his brother's stead when his brother's not around to do it for him. And it becomes like a really like sad repetition.
Yeah.
And then again, there's like the repetition there in Crosby where like Tobias' personality goes, oh, there you are, we'll go on then, cry, which is then gets the most cathartic like repetition in the Cromsfield smelting shed.
Right back at him, yeah.
And Oliver goes, there you are, Tobias, we'll go on then, cry, and then he ascends up the machine to become a hybrid, leaving Tobias wailing and screaming on the ground below.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, I think the more important one, that all three of the main characters repeat. We hear it first from Henrietta, and then from Oliver again in the Crosby scene, and then even Toby, during the second Warshire reset scene when Henrietta is bringing him back. I'm not who you think I am. We hear Henrietta say it first, and like after she and Daisy have successfully stopped from going down the mine like Thomas in the lead mine, and like she's yelling at Daisy, and what if I hadn't been able to stop you? I told you I'm not who you think I am.
Yeah.
And that's when Daisy gives like the good things speech, and like plants the seeds for Henrietta's arc for that the rest of the movie. And then again in the Crosby scene with Oliver, when Atherton asks, why do you need your brother? Oliver goes, I'm not who you think I am. And then he gives his whole like, I'm not anybody, I'm not yet speech. And that's his version of that theme. And then for Toby, he's in like the memory dream as Henrietta is slowly bringing him back to the second Warshire reset. And Henrietta's like, Toby, you have to wake up. And Toby goes, Henrietta, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not good or decent. I tried to pretend like I can make everyone think I was, but I was wrong. Again, he's admitting that the actions he took on Sodor were a lot more selfish than he originally let on. And that's why he's saying, I'm not who you think I am. Because he knows he did wrong. He knows he's not a perfect person. And he's admitting that he let that control him, let that control his choices, and it destroyed him. And then there's actually a hidden fourth time that this phrase is said. It's at the very, very, very beginning of the movie, in the opening prologue. We hear Montague's narration as he is taken to the Cromsfield scrapyards across the bridge through the Hollow Crown opening. He says, when you are failed, you are fixed, you are cared for, but not me. I wasn't who they thought I was. And now I was here, the place where we all lose who we are.
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it's there. So really, Montague was the first to say it, and it's in like the first minute or two of the movie. So like the way like no excuses was like were like the arc words for Half-Pariah. I'm not who you think I am, are the arc words for Arcane Merchant, and it's a very like small but important line that touching on the themes of identity and purpose in the movie.
And I mean that's central to the entire thing. Um, Sorry, I'm just over here like I'd love just listening to this, just uh, hearing you know this script so well, which I mean I would hope so after 10 years, but like the way that you are able to talk about how every piece of dialogue, every phrase, every word has a place in the structure of what you're trying to build, I think just shows an incredible love of attention to detail, an incredible amount of craftsmanship and intentionality in how you write and how you write dialogue in particular that really I think has shown through. And hearing that like the repetition is part of that. I mean, it makes so much sense. Sort of a very classic writing thing is to like take an idea or a phrase that's repeated, but repeat it in a new light or in a different context, in a different tone. And it's something that it's hard to consciously think about, but the effect that it has is still effective nonetheless. I would say. Here's one sort of in terms of either the writing, which obviously was very detailed and very intense, or just the production process itself, which also very intense. Are there any things that stand out to you in terms of challenges, things that were difficult to write, maybe a scene that was hard to crack, something that you struggled with, or any just like technical challenges that came up during filming, things that maybe took a while to really get right and get satisfactory?
So not really writing, but definitely during the production, there were a lot of things I had to think about when I was filming, especially for the visual effects. As I was filming, I would first do test shots to see, okay, what can I do to really help these visual effects marry into the Trainz footage I'm shooting here as effectively as possible. And I think it's really only for the void scenes, like especially like when Tobias starts torturing Toby, that really proved the most challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the stuff where it cuts in and out of the void. The remake of the scene from Half-Pariah where Toby shoves Montague into the ocean, and we see it first from his perspective. Then there's like a camera glitch, and we're seeing it from Montague's point of view as he flies over the edge of the cliff. He's sailing down. He goes into the water. He sinks through the roiling waves, and then he lands on the bottom of the ocean bed. And there's the mirror shard where Toby is looking in on him from the void. That was one of the most difficult scenes to try and implement. Not film. Filming was fine because it was just a green screen shard that I filmed in Trainz.
Mm-hmm.
But then implementing it, like tracking the Toby plate in that green screen shard, and making sure all the bubbles that I added in post tracked correctly. Especially with the camera movement, because I originally thought, maybe I'll get Cameron Bramley, Mainland Studios, to animate this. But I was like, wait, maybe I can do this myself. It would have been so much simpler if I'd gotten him to animate it, but I somehow did it. I somehow got the bubbles to track to the ocean floor, and I somehow got the Toby plate to track correctly to the mirror shard. And it was a lot of work. So much work. But I made it happen. I wanted there to also be like a small little dust cloud that popped up when Montague hit the bottom. That kind of popped up in our field of view, but it wasn't tracking correctly. I was like, it's not necessary. We understand what's happening visually.
We get it. Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like,
I'm done. No more mirror shard. It's done.
And then the rest of the mirror shards, they were stationary shots. They were easy to do. But then the other really, really difficult scene was the Hell Gordon sequence. Those fire effects, trying to make sure that they implemented well, both in front of the Hell Gordon zombie and behind him. So much rotoscoping. So much rotoscoping. Oh, God. I,
The sound of an exhausted man.
and it still wasn't even perfect.
What are you talking about? I thought it was. I would never know.
I mean, if you look closely, you see like the mask. Because I used magic mask for some of the shots, and I had to really beat the magic mask in After Effects into submission to actually mask what I wanted masked out. You'll see that it's like it shifts and morphs a lot in ways it shouldn't if you pay really close attention. But for the most part, it works. For the most part, it worked. But it took so much work. It took so much work to get those visual effects to incorporate the right way I needed them to.
Certainly, I think it has paid off to a great degree. I mean, the two shots that you're describing are visually, I think, some of the biggest standouts from the film. Like the zombie Hell Gordon is another one that I've seen people just continue to talk about as this huge wow factor moment in some ways of just visually very upsetting and terrifying in those ways. And like the mirror shard thing as well with the drowning duck. I remember seeing that for the first time and really taking note of that shot as being very effective. So it certainly has paid off, but doesn't sound like an enviable amount of rotoscoping to get it done. This is maybe something that, just having never really filmed in Trainz or used it to any great degree. Obviously, things like the void scene and the Hell Gordon and the effects with the fire are things that will require things outside of Trainz. Can you talk about like what the visual effects process is like for the shots that maybe don't have those big explosions or shatters or lightning effects, things that might be more like normal scenes? Like, how much of what we're seeing is just straight Trainz, and how much is touched up in some way with lighting or effects or different things like that?
So I think a lot of it was, especially for like the lightning effects. I would film the scene normally in daytime settings, in like the normal daytime settings, or whatever time of day it's supposed to be. And then I would film that same shot at nighttime with Riley's spotlight assets. It allows you to put colored lights. You can control the intensity, the hue and the saturation of the light. And using those lights really helped sell a lot of like the big lightning and fire effects, because you were able to create lighting that effects like those would naturally create. And so it helps it marry into those scenes easier. But there are also a lot of shots where it was just a simple matter of filming it once with one element, and then like Riley's advanced camera, I was able to like use like a keyframe camera in Trainz. That's like one of the cool things you can do in Trainz 19 now. Like it's really cool. It's like a blender camera almost. You can set keyframes and it repeats the exact same camera motion at the exact same speed both times. So I would get one plate with one element that I needed in frame, and then I would film it again with the other element I needed, and then it would just be a simple matter of compositing. And there are quite a few shots like that in Arcane Merchant, where it's all in Trainz, just not quite in the same shot, but they're stitched together to look like they're in the same shot. Like the shot of Oliver going up the platform to the conversion chamber of the hybrid making machine. That was done entirely in Trainz, but I had one plate where I got Oliver just sitting stationary on the platform in front of a blue screen, and I just had the camera push into him from a lower angle, and then I went into the actual like Cromsfield smelting shed set with the hybrid making machine, and I just had it like crane up the length of the machine itself while doing a slight push in to like mirror what would be normally seen in like the first shot I got of Oliver, and then stitching those two shots together and being super careful about the chroma keying for the blue screen, you'd never know that they were not the same shot.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't know.
And then also in the fire rescue scene, like after like Daisy pulls Toby back onto the rails, and we hear the coal hopper starting to fall, that was actually two shots. So we had the one shot where Daisy is pulling Toby and Henrietta away from the collapsing tower, and the tower is actually not in that shot. I actually got the tower in a separate shot on a green screen set. I made sure the lighting was coming from the same direction and at roughly the same intensity to match what it would look like on the big shunting yard set during the fire scene. And then I actually put an invisible engine beneath the coal hopper and went into the follow camera mode, and then just did a simple tilt. And then I combined that shot with like the original train shot in the set itself. It simulated the tower toppling over.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, all these things are completely foreign to me in many ways, having not done a lot of trains. But yeah, that's fascinating.
I definitely will say I learned a lot about visual effects, and I already respected visual effects workers before, but like now I'm just like, you guys deserve all the money.
Well, that's maybe a good transition. Other than maybe visual effects techniques, what do you feel like are the biggest lessons that you learned through this long production process? Things that you took away from it?
I definitely learned there's a lot more in trains that I'm capable of doing than I originally thought. I just have to really know. I just have to really plan them out. And I also learned that Trainz is still as finicky as it was back when I filmed Half-Pariah. So,
Mm-hmm.
I again, it's just it comes down to having a plan and really knowing the tool I am using as I'm using it.
What about in terms of writing or in terms of storytelling? Are there lessons that you feel like you've taken away from the story that you've crafted, or the story that you've told, things that you've found yourself identifying with, or anything that surprised you about what you found along the way?
I definitely think simplicity is something I should strive for more, just because the whole Toby is a clone of Montague's consciousness. The original Tobias is an abusive megalomaniacal monster. I definitely think complexity is not necessarily a bad thing, but it should be definitely handled with as much care as possible.
It's one of the unique traits of the Tobias verse, I would say, is that sort of level of complexity, and it's something that stands out, I would say, from your everyday Thomas project, certainly. Thinking about now the film as a final product, and with all of the reactions that people are having to it, what do you hope that people take away from watching Arcane Merchant, or from hearing and from understanding the story?
I guess what I'm hoping they take away is that identity is really hard to really settle on. It's really hard to really find very quickly, but it's something you should still strive to find in yourself and make your own. Just because if you don't, somebody else will try to make an identity for you, and you'll kind of become trapped in that. So you need to really think about who you are on your own terms, and try and figure yourself out, and really just make something of yourself as you see fit. That's kind of what I hope people take away from this, the main message I hope people take away from this movie.
Do you think that you have learned anything about your identity over the course of making this, or even just over the course of the transpiring of life in the last 10 years?
I definitely think I've learned I'm not as friendly as I thought I once was, and I'm not as open to making new friends as I thought I was. But I also am incredibly grateful to the friends I do have, and I'm incredibly grateful to be where I am in life. I'm incredibly grateful to have the space and the opportunity to still not be a perfect person, but still have opportunities to grow and learn more about myself, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly grateful to call you a friend, and I think that we're all grateful to have you as a part of this community and as a wonderful contributor of such creative works. And yeah, I think it sounds like this production, for as massive an effort as it is, has always been personal for you. Is what it sounds like. Something that is very very important and very very close to you for completing it.
Absolutely, it was.
I guess as we wrap up, maybe with some final thoughts here. I know people are going to ask if I don't ask. Is there anything you can tell us about a third film after you hopefully please take a nice long break and take care of yourself um, after this massive effort? Is there anything you can tell us about a threequel for Tobias?
Yes, I can. So there is going to be a third film. It's going to be the final film in the trilogy. I already have an outline for the third film. It's half detailed, half bare bones, but it's the full plot. And I hope over the next couple of years, I'm able to really like get the script finished. And in the next couple of years after that, I'm able to like get production going and hopefully have it out before another 10 years has passed after this one.
I mean, certainly this one was worth the wait. It's an interesting thing to think about. When the first film came out, you mentioned you were just starting college. I was just starting high school, I think, and for a lot of people, I think it's a similar story of you know Thomas itself is a very nostalgic thing for a lot of people to look back on. But now here we are 10 years later, and suddenly Half-Pariah is a fan film of a nostalgic thing that itself has become nostalgic in some ways.
I've noticed that. I've noticed that.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of people have changed a lot since the first film, but it's still something that carries on in the cultural zeitgeist. If I can sound pretentious for a minute, I guess what have you noticed about reflecting on Half-Pariah and how its legacy has continued?
I think it's like honestly so wild that people like continually comment on Half-Pariah and now Arcane Merchant too. Like they're always like, "Yo, I watched Half-Pariah when I was like a wee lad, when I was like a kid in like elementary school or middle school or high school. I've been following you since I was like a kid." And Half-Pariah blew me away back then, and to see the sequel out now is so amazing. That's always just like that's like really really cool for me to see. It's really really cool to think that Half-Pariah is kind of like fandom history now, and it's like left its mark on fandom's history. And now people are going to be able to see this continuation finally after so long. And obviously, it's quite a bit different than Half-Pariah, but how long will it be before this becomes like a really cherished memory, too? That's always like, it's like really cool for me to think about.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I feel like Half-Pariah was in many ways such a tentpole production of Thomas fan content, and now we're, I guess, finally getting to a next point in the tent. What have your thoughts been just in general on the proliferation of Thomas fan content and maybe how it has changed in the years since Half-Pariah up to the context now around now and Arcane Merchant.
I think it's been really amazing to see like people come up after me, like making their own incredible like Thomas videos, Thomas media. People have been making feature length films after Half Pariah, like Nikki, Vinny's like Magic Railroad parody, Matt Majad, Enterprising Engines, like Thomas and the Fortune Teller, Vincente 22's Bad Influence, which just came out about a month before Arcane Merchant. Carson Video Workshops Works, The Jury, which actually just came out a day after Arcane Merchant's an incredible piece. Um, Daylight 3's like Forest Horror series, Blue Snowplow's Horrors of Hallwyn Lake. There's and Biscuit Cat's like Tedious Tales of Sodor. Like it's been really cool to see people take on so many different like takes on this world and these characters, and people like me are coming up through film school, coming up through film production jobs, and we're really using those skills to make like really like incredible media, incredible like fan works, and that's really incredible to see, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost on a totally different level from what things were like 10 years ago. Just the amount of technical skill and expertise that has gone into fan productions. I think all of the works that you mentioned are really outstanding examples of that. And then just watching people continue to grow as writers and storytellers as well. You know, like there are people still writing and making videos today that were making them 10 years ago as well, in addition to all of the new folks that have come up. But just to see the evolution of how much people are able to grow has been really, really awesome. We're getting close here to the end of all of the questions that I have. Do you have any other final thoughts? Anything that you want to tell folks about Arcane Merchant or what we can look forward to from you in the future?
So right now, I am gonna be resting quite a bit before I really start working.
Please do.
Yes, I trust me. I am going to definitely gonna be resting quite a lot, playing video games, working on the third film here and there, starting to slowly but surely ramp back up into it. Mainly I'm just gonna be resting, trying to get over the last of the sickness, whatever it was. But yeah, that's about it. In terms of Arcane Merchant, um, oh yes. So eventually in the coming months, I'll be releasing behind the scenes. I'll be releasing deleted, extended slash alternate scenes. Eventually, like the full assembly cut.
Ooh.
I'll be releasing the Trainz assets I used for both Arcane Merchant and Half-Pariah. My patrons will get it first, but then they will be eventually released publicly. The soundtrack is already released, and in a little under a year, on Christmas next year, Christmas 2025, I'll release it publicly for everybody to be able to download and use. And yeah, that's about it for Arcane Merchant. Like the main movie's out, everything else that comes out is just gonna be extras and goodies for all y'all.
Do you feel prepared to start seeing the evil Tobias Trainz assets start popping up in other people's videos?
I mean, I'm going to release them publicly, so I mean, not right away, but eventually. So I'm prepared. I'm prepared, I think.
Well, awesome. I think we will all look forward to all of those behind the scenes things. I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. This has been an absolute pleasure, as always, to talk to you and to hear about this project. Again, just firm congratulations on the culmination of your hard work, and we very much look forward to everything to come in the future, and especially to you resting and getting over your sickness first.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Milky. Thank you for having me on tonight and talking all things Arcane Merchant, Half-Pariah, and all that great stuff. Thank you so much again.
Of course. Where can people find you if they somehow don't already know? Where can they look for all of this stuff to come out?
So you can find me on YouTube. Just type in Tines Sensahthe, TINESSENSAHTHE. And on my channel, you'll find both Half-Pariah and Arcane Merchant, and you will also find links to my Twitter account, my Blue Sky account, and my Patreon.
Absolutely. And SoundCloud, I hope, to go listen to that soundtrack.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And thank all of you for tuning in and listening to this interview. This has been an absolute blast. And I don't know if this is going to be something that I'll do more of in the future. I certainly have other folks from the fandom that I love talking to, so maybe stay tuned for more things like this. But TBD. And in the meantime, thank you so much, Tines, and to everyone listening. Hope you have a happy new year, a wonderful start to your 2025, and we will see you later.
All right, bye, folks.